He drained our retirement account of $2 million to fund his secret life with a woman half my age. But what he didn't realize was that I'd been preparing for this moment for years, and I held the keys to his entire future. Hey everyone, where are you watching from today? I'm about to share a story that shocked an entire community and changed the way I view trust forever. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The summer heat shimmered across the manicured lawns of Riveridge Estates, an exclusive gated community nestled in the outskirts of Charlotte, North Carolina. The neighborhood was a testament to success. Sprawling colonial homes with pristine gardens, luxury vehicles parked in circular driveways, and the distant sound of tennis balls being volleyed at the community courts. This had been my home for the past 23 years, and from the outside looking in, my life appeared flawless. My name is Rebecca Mitchell, though everyone calls me Becky. At 58, I had what many would consider the ideal life. A successful husband, 2 grown children who had forged their own paths, and a beautiful home that had graced the pages of Southern Living magazine twice. My husband, Thomas Mitchell, was the regional director for one of the largest investment firms in the Southeast. He had a reputation for being shrewd, charismatic, and trustworthy, qualities that had propelled him from a middle-class background to the upper echelons of Charlotte's financial elite. We met during our sophomore year at Duke University. I was studying business with hopes of breaking into the male-dominated world of finance, while Thomas was already making a name for himself in the economics department. He had that rare combination of intellect and charm that drew people to him. His ambition was magnetic, and I found myself captivated by his vision of the future, a future we would build together. After graduation, we married in a modest ceremony with our families and closest friends. Thomas immediately secured a position at a prestigious investment firm, while I took a job at a local bank. The plan was for both of us to climb our respective corporate ladders, but life had other ideas. When I became pregnant with our first child, Emily, just 2 years into our marriage, we made the decision that I would put my career on hold to focus on raising our family. "It's just temporary," Thomas assured me, his arm around my shoulders as we stood in the nursery we'd painted a soft yellow. "Once the kids are in school, you can go back. Your brain is too brilliant to waste." I believed him. I believed in us. And for many years, that belief sustained me through the challenges of raising our children, Emily, and later our son, Jason, while Thomas's career soared. By the time our children were teenagers, Thomas had been promoted multiple times and was earning more money than we'd ever imagined possible. We moved from our starter home to a larger house in a good school district, and finally to Riveridge Estates when Thomas became regional director. Throughout those years, I didn't sit idle. While I hadn't returned to formal employment, I managed our household with the same strategic thinking I would have applied in a corporate setting. I volunteered for charity boards, became the treasurer for multiple community organizations, and kept my financial knowledge sharp. Thomas and I maintained joint accounts, but I also opened a small separate account where I deposited the modest inheritance I received after my father's passing. "Smart move," Thomas had said when I mentioned the separate account. "Diversification is always a good strategy, even in family finances." As our children left for college, Emily to Northwestern and Jason to UVA, I found myself with more time on my hands. The sprawling house felt empty without the constant activity of family life. Thomas was working longer hours than ever, often returning home well after dinner, his mind still preoccupied with work even when he was physically present. "The market never sleeps, Becky," he'd say, kissing my cheek before retreating to his home office to take late-night calls from clients or colleagues. I decided to put my skills to use by starting a small financial consulting business, focusing on helping women navigate major life transitions, divorce, widowhood, career changes. It started as occasional advice given to friends, but soon grew into a legitimate business with a growing client list. Thomas was supportive, if somewhat dismissive. "It's great you found something to keep busy," he said during one of our increasingly rare dinner conversations. The empty nest can be hard on mothers. I didn't correct his misunderstanding of my motivations. My business wasn't about filling time. It was about reclaiming a part of myself that had been dormant, about using my mind in ways that challenged and fulfilled me. And the more I worked with clients, particularly women going through divorces, the more I realized how vulnerable many of them were due to financial arrangements they hadn't questioned during their marriages. One spring evening, as I reviewed a client's portfolio, highlighting areas where her soon-to-be ex-husband might be hiding assets, I felt a strange disquiet settle over me. Thomas and I had built what I believed was a solid marriage, but there were patterns in his behavior that had become increasingly pronounced over the past year. The late nights had grown more frequent. His explanations about where he'd been became vague. He'd changed the password on his phone. He'd started taking weekend business trips that hadn't been on his calendar before. These were the same patterns my clients described when they first suspected their husbands were having affairs. But I pushed the thought away. Thomas wasn't like those other husbands. We had a partnership, a history, a family. Our 30th wedding anniversary was approaching, and I suggested we take a trip to Italy, a place we'd always talked about visiting but had never prioritized. Thomas seemed uncomfortable with the idea, shifting in his seat at the breakfast table as I showed him the villa I'd found to rent in Tuscany. "I don't think I can get away for that long," he said, not meeting my eyes. "The Wilson account is at a critical stage." "The Wilson account can survive for 10 days without you," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "We've been talking about this trip for decades, Thomas." He sighed, reaching for his coffee. "Let me see what I can do. But don't book anything yet." I nodded, swallowing my disappointment. That night, I lay awake long after Thomas had fallen, asleep, listening to the rhythmic sound of his breathing. Something was wrong. I could feel it with the same certainty I'd felt when Emily had broken her arm falling from a tree at age 7, before she'd even started to cry. The next morning, Thomas left early for a breakfast meeting. I sat at our kitchen island, sipping my coffee and staring out at the garden I'd painstakingly designed over the years. The azaleas were in full bloom, their vibrant pink blossoms a stark contrast to the heavy feeling in my chest. On impulse, I went to Thomas's home office. It was immaculate as always. Thomas hated clutter. His desk held his laptop, which I knew was password protected, a leather blotter, a family photo from our vacation to Maui 5 years earlier, and a sleek desk organizer containing pens and paper clips. The filing cabinet in the corner was locked, but I knew where he kept the key, in the bottom drawer of his bedside table, in a small wooden box that had belonged to his father. For several minutes, I stood in the doorway, debating with myself. This wasn't me. I'd never been the type to snoop or spy, but the nagging feeling wouldn't subside. With a deep breath, I retrieved the key and opened the filing cabinet. Most of the files were exactly what I'd expect: mortgage documents, insurance, policies, our children's academic records, tax returns. But in the very back of the bottom drawer, I found a folder labeled simply RP. Inside were statements from an account I'd never seen before, at a small private bank known for its discretion. The statements showed regular transfers, large sums, of money moving out every month. There were also receipts from jewelry stores, high-end restaurants I'd never visited, and a leasing agreement for a condominium in an upscale part of Charlotte, about 20 minutes from our home. My hands trembled as I examined each document. The money being transferred out of this account, thousands each month, was substantial, but it was the leasing agreement that made my blood run cold. It was in Thomas's name, but with a co-tenant, Rachel Porter. I didn't recognize the name, but a quick search on my phone revealed a LinkedIn profile for a Rachel Porter who worked at Thomas's firm, in the marketing department. Her profile photo showed a striking woman with dark hair and sharp green eyes who couldn't be older than 35. I carefully photographed every document in the folder with my phone, then returned everything exactly as I'd found it. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my mind was strangely calm, almost detached, as if observing someone else's crisis. Back in the kitchen, I pulled up our joint investment accounts on my laptop. Thomas and I had been diligent about saving for retirement, building a portfolio that would allow us to travel, perhaps buy a vacation home, and leave something for our children. Our financial advisor, Marcus Stevens, had repeatedly assured us we were on track for a comfortable retirement. But as I reviewed the accounts, I noticed discrepancies. Our main retirement fund, which had held just over $2 million the last time I'd checked, was now showing a balance of just under $300,000. Several other investment accounts had been substantially reduced or emptied entirely over the past 18 months. I called Marcus immediately, but got his voicemail. "Marcus, it's Becky Mitchell. I'm looking at our accounts and seeing some concerning transactions. Please call me as soon as possible." Next, I called our bank and requested an appointment with the manager for that afternoon. Then I began a methodical review of all our financial records, pulling statements, tracking transactions, creating a timeline of withdrawals and transfers. By noon, I had a clearer picture, and it was devastating. Over the past 2 years, Thomas had systematically drained our retirement savings and other investment accounts, moving the money first to our joint checking account, then to the private account I'd discovered in his files. All told, he'd diverted nearly $2 million, money we'd spent decades accumulating for our future, our security. And based on the receipts I'd found, much of that money had gone toward maintaining a luxurious lifestyle with Rachel Porter. The jewelry receipts alone totaled over $200,000, including a particularly extravagant purchase from Tiffany just 2 weeks before. Marcus returned my call as I was preparing to leave for the bank. "Becky, I got your message. What's going on?" He sounded genuinely concerned. "I'm looking at our retirement account, Marcus. It's practically empty. Did you authorize these withdrawals?" I kept my voice steady, professional. "A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off." There was a pause. "Thomas said you both had discussed a major reallocation of assets. He had all the proper authorization. Said you were investing in a new venture." "I see," I replied, my suspicions confirmed. "And when was the last time you spoke with Thomas about our portfolio?" "About 3 weeks ago. He mentioned you might be calling and seemed anxious about it." Of course he was anxious. He knew this day would come eventually, the day I discovered what he'd done. "Thank you, Marcus. I'll be in touch." I ended the call before he could ask more questions. At the bank, the manager, a woman named Diane who knew both Thomas and me well, confirmed what I already suspected. Thomas had been making large withdrawals from our joint accounts for months, always with the proper authorization. As a joint account holder, he had every legal right to move the money. "Is there anything else you can tell me about these transactions?" I asked, maintaining my composure even as I felt my future crumbling around me. Diane hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I'm not supposed to say this, but Thomas usually made these withdrawals when he came in with a younger woman. Dark hair, very well dressed. They seemed close." I nodded, thanking her for her candor. As I walked to my car in the bank parking lot, my phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." For a moment, I stood perfectly still, in the warm spring air, letting the magnitude of the betrayal wash over me. Thomas hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd systematically pillaged our future to finance his new life with a woman almost 25 years his junior. I drove home on autopilot, my mind churning with implications. Our retirement was gone. The future we'd planned, traveling the world, helping our children with down payments on their first homes, perhaps even retiring early, all of it had vanished. And Thomas clearly intended to leave me with nothing while he started fresh with Rachel. Back at home, I sat in our living room, surrounded by the evidence of our 30 years together, photos of family vacations, artwork we'd collected on anniversary, trips, the antique clock that had been a gift from Thomas's parents on our wedding day. My entire adult life had been built on what I now realized was a foundation of sand. I allowed myself exactly 1 hour to feel the full weight of my grief and anger. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes burned. I threw a crystal vase against the wall, watching it shatter into 1,000 glittering pieces on the hardwood floor. I screamed into a pillow until my voice gave out. Then I cleaned up the broken glass, washed my face, and sat down at the dining room table with my laptop and a legal pad. If Thomas thought I would collapse under the weight of his betrayal, he didn't know me at all. And if he believed he could steal my future without consequences, he was about to learn a very expensive lesson. Because what Thomas didn't know, what he had somehow failed to remember, or perhaps had never fully understood, was that I wasn't just his wife of 30 years. I wasn't just the mother of his children or the woman who had supported his career while putting her own ambitions aside. I was Rebecca Mitchell, summa cum laude graduate of Duke University's business program. I was the financial consultant who had helped dozens of women reclaim their financial independence after betrayal. And most importantly, I was the person who had insisted, 25 years ago, that Thomas signed specific documents when he founded his first investment venture, documents that would now prove to be his undoing. As I opened my laptop and began to type, a calm determination replaced my earlier anguish. Thomas had stolen our retirement fund for his mistress, believing I would be left with nothing. But he had forgotten the most important lesson in both finance and marriage. Never underestimate your partner. I spent the next 3 hours in what my children used to call command center mode. It was the same focused state I entered when planning elaborate family vacations or managing school fundraisers, except now I was mapping out the systematic betrayal of my marriage and financial security. Created a detailed spreadsheet tracking every withdrawal Thomas had made from our retirement accounts over the past 2 years. The pattern was clear. The amounts had started small, almost experimental, as if testing whether I would notice. When I didn't, because I had trusted him implicitly, the withdrawals grew larger and more frequent. In the past 6 months alone, he had moved over $800,000. My phone buzzed with another text from Thomas. "Dinner with clients running late. Don't wait up." The casual presumption in his message, that I would accept this flimsy excuse without question, made my blood boil. How many client dinners had actually been evenings with Rachel Porter? How long had they been laughing at my naivety? I texted back, "No problem. Hope it goes well." Let him think I remained oblivious. While my initial shock had faded, I still couldn't fully comprehend how Thomas had changed so dramatically. The man I married had been ambitious, but ethical, driven, but compassionate. We had built our life on shared values and mutual respect. At least I thought we had. When had he become someone capable of such calculated deception? I opened my personal laptop, the one Thomas never used, and navigated to a password-protected folder labeled Family Archives. Inside was a subfolder marked Mitchell Ventures, containing scanned documents from the early days of our marriage. 25 years ago, when Thomas was ready to launch his first independent investment firm, we were still a young couple with limited resources. My father had recently passed away, leaving me a modest inheritance of $75,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to serve as seed money for Thomas's venture. Before transferring the funds, I had insisted on formal documentation of my investment, a precaution my father had taught me. "It's just business, Thomas," I had said when he seemed hurt by my insistence on paperwork. Dad always said that clear agreements make for lasting partnerships. Thomas had reluctantly agreed, signing documents that made me a 51% silent partner in Mitchell Ventures. At the time, it was merely a formality. We were building a life together, after all. The company had thrived for several years before being acquired by a larger firm, providing Thomas with the connections that propelled his career forward. What Thomas apparently didn't realize, or had conveniently forgotten, was that the original partnership agreement contained specific clauses about the founding intellectual property and methodology that Thomas had developed. Those clauses had never been nullified, even after the acquisition. Mitchell Ventures technically still existed as a shell company, one that held the patents and proprietary trading algorithms Thomas had developed and continued to use throughout his career. As the majority owner, I had rights that could potentially impact not just his current employment, but his entire professional future. I closed the laptop, my mind racing with possibilities. I needed professional advice before proceeding further. I reached for my phone and called the one person I knew I could trust, with both the legal and emotional complexity of my situation. Grace Anderson had been my roommate at Duke and was now one of Charlotte's most respected divorce attorneys. More importantly, she had no connection to Thomas's professional circle and was known for her absolute discretion. "Becky, this is unexpected. Everything okay?" Grace's voice held a note of concern. We met for lunch occasionally, but rarely spoke on the phone unless it was important. "I need to see you, professionally, as soon as possible." I kept my voice steady. There was a brief pause. "I have an opening tomorrow at 9 a.m., my office. I'll be there. And Grace? No one can know about this, especially not Thomas." "Understood. Bring whatever financial documentation you can gather. And, Becky, I'm sorry you need me in this capacity." After hanging up, I faced a new challenge, making it through the evening without revealing what I knew. I couldn't confront Thomas until I understood my legal options and had secured evidence. If he realized I was aware of his betrayal, he might accelerate whatever exit strategy he was planning. I spent the evening gathering documents, making copies of everything that might be relevant, and securing them in a lockbox at a bank where Thomas and I didn't have joint accounts. I also transferred the modest funds from my personal account, about $37,000, to a new account at the same bank, ensuring I would have access to emergency money if needed. Thomas arrived home just after 11 p.m. I was in bed with a book, though I hadn't turned a page in the hour I'd been waiting. He entered our bedroom with the cautious movements of someone trying not to disturb a sleeping spouse. "You're still up," he said, sounding surprised as he loosened his tie. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, setting my book aside. "How was your dinner?" "Productive. The Wilson account is finally coming together." He disappeared into the bathroom, and I heard the shower start. I studied the closed bathroom door, wondering how many times he had stood on the other side washing away evidence of his time with Rachel before returning to our bed. The thought made me physically ill. When Thomas emerged in his pajamas, his hair still damp, he slipped under the covers with a tired sigh. "You okay?" he asked, noticing my silence. "Just thinking about Emily's birthday next month. We should plan something special." I managed a smile, marveling at my own performance. Inside, I was screaming. "Sure," he murmured, already turning away. "We'll figure something out." As his breathing deepened into sleep, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For 30 years, I had slept beside this man, sharing dreams and disappointments, creating a family and a future together. Now, listening to him sleep peacefully after spending the evening with his mistress and our retirement money, I felt a cold clarity descend. This wasn't just about the money, though the financial betrayal was staggering. It was about the calculated cruelty of his deception, the way he had systematically undermined our shared future while maintaining the facade of our marriage. He had stolen not just our savings but years of my trust. And he had done it while looking me in the eye every day. I finally fell into a fitful sleep around 3 a.m., dreaming of balance sheets with endless columns of red ink. The next morning, I woke before Thomas and quietly prepared for my meeting with Grace. I dressed in one of my more expensive suits, a navy Armani ensemble I usually reserved for charity galas, and applied my makeup with particular care. Armor, of sorts. Thomas shuffled into the kitchen as I was pouring coffee into a travel mug. "You're dressed up," he observed, eyeing my outfit with mild curiosity. "Meeting with a potential client," I replied, the lie coming easily. "A referral from Sandra Winters, high-net-worth divorcee who needs help reorganizing her finances." Thomas nodded absently, reaching for the coffee pot. "Don't forget we have the Hendersons' anniversary party this weekend. Mike mentioned you haven't RSVP'd. The normalcy of his reminder, as if we were still a functioning couple with a shared social calendar, struck me as obscene. But I nodded, grabbing my purse. "I'll take care of it today. Have a good day." He leaned in for his customary goodbye, kiss, and it took every ounce of self-control to turn my cheek toward him instead of recoiling. His lips brushed my skin, and I suppressed a shudder. "See you tonight," he said as I headed for the door. "Looking forward to it," I replied, the bitterest lie of all. Grace's office was located in a converted Victorian home in one of Charlotte's historic districts. The elegant exterior, with its wrap-around porch and gingerbread trim, belied the cutting-edge legal practice within. Her receptionist, recognizing me from social events, offered a warm but professionally neutral greeting before escorting me to Grace's office. Grace stood as I entered, coming around her desk to embrace me. At 60, she remained striking, tall and angular with a silver bob and penetrating gray eyes. She had never married, joking that she knew too much about divorce to risk it. "Before we start," she said, gesturing to a chair, "I need to confirm that you're here for yourself, not consulting for a client. Everything you tell me will be privileged." "It's for me." My voice caught slightly. Saying it aloud made the situation real in a way that my night of research hadn't. Grace's expression softened momentarily before her professional demeanor returned. "Then tell me everything, and don't leave anything out. The details matter." For the next hour, I methodically outlined what I had discovered: the drained accounts, the mysterious Rachel Porter, the monthly transfers, the condominium lease, the jewelry receipts. I presented the documentation I had gathered, including the photographs of Thomas's secret files and my spreadsheet tracking the withdrawal patterns. Grace listened without interruption, taking occasional notes. When I mentioned the Mitchell Ventures, documents and my 51% ownership, her eyebrows rose slightly, but she remained silent until I finished. "Your thoroughness is impressive," she said finally, setting down her pen. "Most clients come to me with suspicions and emotions. You've brought me a case. I've spent years helping women navigate financial chaos after betrayal," I replied. I wasn't about to become another victim story. Grace nodded, tapping her fingers thoughtfully on her desk. "The good news, if we can call it that, is that North Carolina is an equitable distribution state. Even without your Mitchell Ventures advantage, you'd be entitled to a fair share of marital assets." "But he's already hidden or spent those assets," I pointed out. $2 million of our retirement is gone. Which is why his actions constitute marital waste, spending marital funds for non-marital purposes. Courts take a dim view of spouses who drain accounts to finance affairs. She leaned forward. But the Mitchell Ventures angle gives you significant leverage beyond standard divorce remedies. If those documents are as you describe, you could potentially claim ownership, interest in intellectual property he's been using throughout his career. That's what I suspected. I felt a grim satisfaction. His current firm uses trading algorithms he developed during our Mitchell Ventures days. The patents are still in the company's name. Grace's expression turned speculative. This changes the dynamics considerably. "Before we move forward, I need to ask, what do you want, Becky? Revenge? Financial security? A reconciliation?" The question caught me off guard. In my focus on uncovering Thomas's betrayal, I hadn't fully considered my endgame. What did I want? I paused, organizing my thoughts. I want what's rightfully mine, not just financially, but my dignity. I want him to face consequences for his actions, and I want to ensure that he can't do this to anyone else in the future. Grace nodded. Then we need a strategy that accomplishes all three. First, we need to secure and expand your evidence. I'll connect you with a forensic accountant who specializes in high-net-worth divorces. We also need a private investigator to document the relationship with Rachel Porter. Won't that be expensive? I asked, suddenly conscious of my limited liquid assets. Grace smiled thinly. We'll add it to what Thomas owes you. In the meantime, I can arrange for the initial consultations on contingency. These professionals know that cases like yours eventually pay. We spent the next hour outlining a plan. I would continue to behave normally at home, giving no indication that I knew about Thomas's deception. Meanwhile, Grace would assemble a team to build our case, focusing particularly on the Mitchell Ventures angle, which she believed would give us maximum leverage. One more thing, Grace said as our meeting concluded. You need to secure any important personal items or irreplaceable possessions. If Thomas realizes you're onto him, things could escalate quickly. I nodded, thinking of my grandmother's jewelry and the family photo albums. I'll take care of it today. Grace walked me to the door, then stopped, her professional demeanor softening. The next few weeks will be difficult, Becky. You'll be living with someone you now know is capable of extraordinary deception. That takes a psychological toll. Do you have someone you can talk to? Someone discreet? I thought of my sister Laura, who lived in Asheville. We spoke weekly, and she had never particularly warmed to Thomas, finding him too polished and calculating for her taste. My sister. She'll be my sanity check through this. Good. Call her today, and call me anytime, day or night, if the situation at home changes. She squeezed my arm. You're handling this with remarkable composure, but don't forget to breathe. As I walked to my car, I felt lighter than I had since discovering the RP folder. I had a plan now, and allies who would help me execute it. Thomas had spent years constructing his betrayal, believing I was too trusting or too oblivious to catch on. Now I would use that misperception to my advantage. On the drive home, I called Laura from my car's Bluetooth. Hey, stranger. Her cheerful voice filled the car. I was just thinking about you. How's life in the lap of luxury? Laura, I said, my composure finally cracking. I need to tell you something, but you can't tell anyone, not even Brian. My brother-in-law was notorious for his inability to keep secrets. Her tone changed immediately. What's wrong? Are you okay? No, I admitted, tears filling my eyes for the first time since my initial discovery. But I will be. By the time I returned home from my meeting with Grace, I had composed myself enough to focus on the next phase of my plan. Thomas wouldn't be home until evening, giving me several hours to secure my most valued possessions, as Grace had advised. I started with the obvious items: my grandmother's pearl necklace and sapphire ring, the vintage Cartier watch my parents had given me for college graduation, and several pieces Thomas had given me in our early years together before status and appearances began to matter more than sentiment. These I placed in a small jewelry roll and tucked into my tote bag to take to my new safe deposit box. Next came the irreplaceable mementos, the children's baby books, our family photo albums, and the handwritten letters my father had left, for each major milestone in my life, to be opened after his death. I carefully packed these in a storage bin and loaded them into my car. I would take them to Laura's on the weekend, using a supposed girls' shopping trip as cover. As I worked, I considered what else Thomas might target if he realized I was building a case against him. My business files were already secure in the cloud and on encrypted drives kept in my office. The Mitchell Ventures documents were safely scanned and stored in multiple locations. My cell phone rang, displaying a Charlotte area code I didn't recognize. "Rebecca Mitchell speaking," I answered professionally. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Detective Anthony Warwick with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. I was given your name by Marcus Stevens. My financial advisor had contacted the police?" I sank into the nearest chair. "What can I help you with, Detective?" "Mr. Stevens expressed concerns about potentially fraudulent activity in your investment accounts. Would you be available to come in for a brief discussion?" My mind raced. This wasn't part of my carefully constructed plan. If Thomas caught wind of a police investigation before I had secured all my evidence, he might destroy crucial documentation or accelerate whatever exit strategy he was planning. "Detective Warwick, I appreciate your concern, but I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I've been working directly with my financial institutions on this matter." I chose my words carefully, not wanting to outright lie to a police officer. "See?" He sounded skeptical. "Mrs. Mitchell, if someone is exploiting your accounts—" "I understand the concern," I interjected smoothly, "but I'd prefer to handle this privately for now. If I determine criminal activity has occurred, I'll contact you immediately." After some additional back and forth, the detective reluctantly agreed to put the matter on hold, giving me his direct number and urging me to call if I changed my mind. As soon as we disconnected, I called Grace. "Marcus contacted the police," I explained when she answered. "I've temporarily deferred their investigation, but this complicates things." "It certainly accelerates our timeline," Grace agreed. "Can you come back to my office this afternoon? I've scheduled the forensic accountant for 3 p.m. We need to move quickly now." By lunchtime, I had secured my most important possessions and prepared a more thorough file of financial documents for the accountant. As I worked, I received a text from Emily, our daughter. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Dad mentioned you've been distracted lately. Everything okay?" I stared at the message, anger flaring. So Thomas was already setting the stage, subtly suggesting to our children that I was having issues, creating a narrative where any accusations I might make could be attributed to my emotional state rather than his actions. I typed back carefully, "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just busy with a challenging new client. How are things in Chicago?" Emily's response came quickly. "The usual chaos. The architectural firm is keeping me swamped. Thinking of coming home for a weekend soon, though." My heart sank. I didn't want our family drama to intrude on Emily's busy life, but I also knew that events were accelerating. If she visited in the coming weeks, she might walk into the middle of an imploding marriage. "That would be wonderful," I replied. "Let me know when you're thinking of coming, and I'll make sure my schedule is clear." It was the best I could offer without raising suspicions. I arrived at Grace's office promptly at 3 p.m. to meet Walter Simmons, the forensic accountant she had recommended. Walter was a soft-spoken man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and an air of meticulous precision. "Mrs. Mitchell has provided an impressive preliminary analysis," Grace told him, gesturing to my spreadsheets. "But we need your expertise to track all the funds and establish a complete picture of the marital assets." Walter nodded, scanning my documents with a practiced eye. "You've laid excellent groundwork. Now we need to follow every dollar, not just what was withdrawn, but where it went afterward. Financial infidelity leaves trails, even when people think they're being clever." For the next hour, Walter explained his process and the additional documentation he would need. He emphasized the importance of secrecy. In cases like this, the element of surprise is crucial. Once your husband realizes you're investigating, financial evidence has a way of disappearing. "I understand." I handed him the file I'd prepared, including account numbers, passwords, and authorization forms allowing him to access our financial records. "How long will your investigation take?" "Given the complexity and time span involved, I'll need at least 2 weeks for a preliminary analysis, longer for a complete report." I glanced at Grace, concerned. "Do we have that much time?" "We'll adjust. As needed, she assured me. Meanwhile, I've arranged for a private investigator to begin surveillance tomorrow. Paul Moretti is the best in Charlotte. Discreet, thorough, and court-tested. As if on cue, there was a knock at the door, and Grace's assistant showed a trim, unremarkable-looking man in his 40s. Paul Moretti's most notable feature was how easily forgettable he appeared, perfect for surveillance work. Mrs. Mitchell, he acknowledged me with a nod. I've reviewed the basic information Ms. Anderson provided. I'll need some additional details about your husband's routine, the suspected mistress, and any patterns you've observed. I provided everything I knew about Thomas's schedule, Rachel Porter's workplace, and the address of the condominium from the lease agreement. Paul took notes in a small leather-bound notebook, asking occasional clarifying questions. My primary objectives will be to document their relationship and identify any additional financial activities, safe deposit boxes, storage units, other properties. People hiding relationships often hide assets in the same locations. Before I left Grace's office, we had established a secure communication protocol. I would check in daily via encrypted messaging apps, and we would meet in person only when absolutely necessary. If Thomas were monitoring my movements or communications, we didn't want to create suspicious patterns. As I drove home, a call came through on my car's Bluetooth. Jason, our son. My heart rate accelerated. Had Thomas already been talking to him too? Hi, sweetheart, I answered, keeping my voice light. Hey, Mom. Got time to talk? His tone was casual. Always, for you. What's up? I've been thinking about graduate school. UVA has a great program, but there's also Chicago, which would put me closer to M. Jason had graduated with a business degree the previous year and was working at a startup. In Richmond, gaining experience before pursuing his MBA. Relief flooded through me, just a normal conversation. Both would be wonderful options. What's drawing you to Chicago besides your sister? As Jason outlined his thoughts on different MBA programs, I realized how much Thomas's betrayal would impact our children. They had grown up with financial security, never questioning whether their education or future plans were at risk. Now, with our retirement funds decimated, the financial landscape has shifted dramatically. Would there still be money to help Jason with graduate school? To assist Emily, if she decided to start her own architectural firm as she'd always dreamed? The legacy Thomas had destroyed wasn't just financial. It was the foundation of security we had built for our family. By the time I arrived home, my resolve had hardened further. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting what remained for our children and ensuring that Thomas couldn't inflict further damage. I spent the evening in my home office, ostensibly working on client files but actually organizing additional documentation for Walter. Around 7 p.m., Thomas called. I'm stuck at the office again, he said, sounding appropriately harried. Don't hold dinner. No problem, I replied, imagining him with Rachel at some romantic restaurant. I've got plenty to keep me busy here. You're working too hard, he said, and I nearly laughed at the irony. Don't wait up. I'll probably crash in the guest room when I get home so I won't wake you. The guest room, a convenient excuse to avoid sleeping beside me after being with her. How many times had he used that justification? Whatever works, I said neutrally. Good luck with your project. After we hung up, I took the opportunity to thoroughly search Thomas's closet and dresser. In the pocket of a rarely worn sports coat, I found a key I didn't recognize, likely to the condominium he shared with Rachel. I photographed it from several angles, then replaced it exactly as I'd found it. In his dresser, tucked beneath neatly folded undershirts, I discovered a small velvet pouch containing a platinum men's ring with a subtle diamond inlay, far more elegant and expensive than the simple gold band he wore as our wedding ring. Was he planning to marry her? The thought hit me with unexpected force, and I sat on the edge of the bed, momentarily dizzy. I carefully returned the ring to its hiding place, then methodically continued my search. In the back of his home office closet, I found a locked briefcase I'd never seen before. Without the key, I couldn't access its contents, but I noted its existence in the growing file of evidence. My phone buzzed with a text from Laura. Checked. Flights. Can be there tomorrow if you need me. The offer was tempting. Having my sister's support in person would be a comfort, but it would also raise Thomas's suspicions if she appeared without a plausible reason. Hold off for now, I replied. Planning to come see you this weekend with some things to store. We'll explain everything then. The next morning, Paul Moretti began his surveillance. Following our established protocol, he would send brief encrypted updates throughout the day. The first came around 10 a.m. Subject left home at 7:30 a.m., arrived. Office at 8:15 a.m., currently in the building. Throughout the day, I received similar messages tracking Thomas's movements. Nothing surprising until 4:30 p.m. Subject leaving office with female, dark hair, mid-30s, matches Porter's description. My heart raced as I waited for the next update, which came 30 minutes later. Subjects entered Ritz-Carlton Hotel, have not emerged. As I drove home, a call came through on my car's Bluetooth. Jason, our son. My heart rate accelerated. Had Thomas already been talking to him too? Hi, sweetheart, I answered, keeping my voice light. Hey, Mom. Got time to talk? His tone was casual. Always, for you. What's up? I've been thinking about graduate school. UVA has a great program, but there's also Chicago, which would put me closer to M. Jason had graduated with a business degree the previous year and was working at a startup. In Richmond, gaining experience before pursuing his MBA. Relief flooded through me, just a normal conversation. Both would be wonderful options. What's drawing you to Chicago besides your sister? As Jason outlined his thoughts on different MBA programs, I realized how much Thomas's betrayal would impact our children. They had grown up with financial security, never questioning whether their education or future plans were at risk. Now, with our retirement funds decimated, the financial landscape has shifted dramatically. Would there still be money to help Jason with graduate school? To assist Emily, if she decided to start her own architectural firm as she'd always dreamed? The legacy Thomas had destroyed wasn't just financial, it was the foundation of security we had built for our family. By the time I arrived home, my resolve had hardened further. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting what remained for our children and ensuring that Thomas couldn't inflict further damage. I spent the evening in my home office, ostensibly working on client files but actually organizing additional documentation for Walter. Around 7 p.m., Thomas called. I'm stuck at the office again, he said, sounding appropriately harried. Don't hold dinner. No problem, I replied, imagining him with Rachel at some romantic restaurant. I've got plenty to keep me busy here. You're working too hard, he said, and I nearly laughed at the irony. Don't wait up. I'll probably crash in the guest room when I get home so I won't wake you. The guest room, a convenient excuse to avoid sleeping beside me after being with her. How many times had he used that justification? Whatever works, I said neutrally. Good luck with your project. After we hung up, I took the opportunity to thoroughly search Thomas's closet and dresser. In the pocket of a rarely worn sports coat, I found a key I didn't recognize, likely to the condominium he shared with Rachel. I photographed it from several angles, then replaced it exactly as I'd found it. In his dresser, tucked beneath neatly folded undershirts, I discovered a small velvet pouch containing a platinum men's ring with a subtle diamond inlay, far more elegant and expensive than the simple gold band he wore as our wedding ring. Was he planning to marry her? The thought hit me with unexpected force, and I sat on the edge of the bed, momentarily dizzy. I carefully returned the ring to its hiding place, then methodically continued my search. In the back of his home office closet, I found a locked briefcase I'd never seen before. Without the key, I couldn't access its contents, but I noted its existence in the growing file of evidence. My phone buzzed with a text from Laura. Checked. Flights. Can be there tomorrow if you need me. The offer was tempting. Having my sister's support in person would be a comfort, but it would also raise Thomas's suspicions if she appeared without a plausible reason. Hold off for now, I replied. Planning to come see you this weekend with some things to store. We'll explain everything then. The next morning, Paul Moretti began his surveillance. Following our established protocol, he would send brief encrypted updates throughout the day. The first came around 10 a.m. Subject left home at 7:30 a.m., arrived. Office at 8:15 a.m., currently in the building. Throughout the day, I received similar messages tracking Thomas's movements. Nothing surprising until 4:30 p.m. Subject leaving office with female, dark hair, mid-30s, matches Porter's description. My heart raced as I waited for the next update, which came 30 minutes later. Subjects entered Ritz-Carlton Hotel, have not emerged. Sure enough, I heard the garage door opening 20 minutes later, followed by Thomas's careful footsteps on the stairs. He paused outside our bedroom door, then continued down the hall to the guest room. In the darkness, I smiled grimly. Let him think I was still oblivious. Let him believe he was still in control of the narrative. Soon enough, he would discover just how mistaken he had been. The morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as I prepared coffee, my movements automatic after decades of the same routine. Thomas appeared in the doorway, his hair still, damp from the shower, dressed impeccably in one of his custom-tailored suits. "You're up early," he commented, reaching for the mug I'd poured him. "Busy day ahead." I kept my tone casual. Client meeting at 9, then lunch with Sandra. He nodded, glancing at his watch. "I've got back-to-back meetings until dinner. The Wilson account is finally coming together." The Wilson account, his perpetual excuse. I wondered if there even was a Wilson account, or if it was simply a convenient fiction to explain his absences. "That's wonderful," I replied, sipping my coffee. "You've been working on that for months." "These things take time." He leaned against the counter, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You look nice today." "New blouse?" The unexpected compliment caught me off guard. The blouse wasn't new. I'd worn it several times before. Was he testing me, or was this a genuine moment of attention? "Just something from the back of the closet," I said with a small smile. "Thought I'd make an effort for my meeting." Thomas nodded, then set down his half-finished coffee. "I should get going. Traffic will be terrible if I don't leave now." He bent to kiss my cheek, his cologne, a new scent I didn't recognize, lingering in the air as he pulled away. For a moment I saw uncertainty in his eyes, a flicker of something that might have been guilt or calculation. "Have a good day," I said, maintaining my facade of normalcy. As soon as his car disappeared down the driveway, I texted Paul. Subject leaving home 7:15 a.m. Seemed unusually attentive this morning. Paul's response came quickly. Noted. Will maintain surveillance. Meeting at the law office still scheduled for 11 a.m.? I confirmed the appointment and finished preparing for the day. My client meeting was fictional, giving me cover to visit Grace's office without raising suspicions. When I arrived at Grace's office at 11 a.m., both she and Walter Simmons were waiting for me, their expressions grave. "We've found something concerning," Grace began once we were settled. "Walter, please explain what you've discovered." The forensic accountant opened his laptop and turned it to face me. "I've been analyzing the flow of funds from your joint accounts to the private account Thomas established. While most of the money went toward purchases consistent with maintaining an affair, jewelry, the condominium lease, expensive dinners, a significant portion was transferred to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands." My stomach tightened. "How significant?" "Approximately $800,000 over the past year, with an accelerating pattern in recent months." Walter displayed a chart showing the increasing frequency and size of transfers. This suggests he's preparing for something, possibly an exit strategy, where these funds would be beyond the reach of U.S. courts. Grace leaned forward. Becky, this changes our approach significantly. If Thomas is moving money offshore, he may be planning to leave the country, not just the marriage. The possibility hadn't occurred to me. I had assumed Thomas was building a new life with Rachel here in Charlotte, perhaps planning to divorce me once he'd secured enough assets for them to live comfortably. The idea that he might disappear altogether was far more alarming. Can we freeze the accounts? I asked, trying to process this new information. We can petition for an emergency. Freeze, but we need to move quickly, Grace replied. Once the funds leave U.S. jurisdiction, they become much harder to recover. There's more, Walter added, scrolling to another document. I found evidence that Thomas recently applied for a second passport under a slight variation of his name, Thomas J. Mitchell instead of Thomas James Mitchell. It's a common tactic for people planning to establish dual identities. My hands trembled slightly as I absorbed this. The man I'd married, the father of my children, wasn't just betraying our marriage. He was constructing an elaborate escape plan that would allow him to vanish with our money, abandoning not just me, but potentially our entire family. When would he make this move? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. That's difficult to predict, Walter admitted, but based on the acceleration of transfers and the passport application, I'd estimate within the next month. We need to act immediately, Grace declared. I've prepared an emergency petition for asset freezing based on Walter's findings. We'll file it this afternoon. I've also drafted a separate motion regarding the Mitchell Ventures intellectual property, which gives us additional leverage. What about Thomas? When do we confront him? The thought of continuing the charade at home, knowing he was planning to disappear with our money, was becoming unbearable. Not yet, Grace cautioned. The court orders need to be in place first. If he realizes we're on to him before the accounts are frozen, he could accelerate his timetable. I nodded, understanding the strategy, but hating the continued deception. And the children? Do I tell them what's happening? Grace's expression softened. That's a personal decision, Becky. But from a legal perspective, it might be wise to prepare them gently. If Thomas attempts to contact them as part of his exit strategy, they should be wary of any requests involving money or assistance. The thought of involving Emily and Jason in this nightmare made my chest ache, but Grace was right. Thomas might try to use our children's trust against them, perhaps asking for help that would facilitate his escape or making promises that would never be fulfilled. I'll talk to them this weekend, I decided. But I won't tell them everything until the legal protections are in place. As I prepared to leave Grace's office, Paul Moretti called with an update. Mrs. Mitchell, I've been following Thomas since he left your home this morning. He didn't go to his office. He went directly to the condominium he shares with Rachel Porter. They left together 30 minutes ago with luggage and drove to a private aviation terminal at Charlotte Douglas Airport. My blood ran cold. Luggage? Are they leaving town? It appears they're taking a weekend trip. I confirmed they're booked on a private charter to Key West, returning Sunday evening. A weekend getaway, funded no doubt by more of our retirement money, but it also meant Thomas would be out of town for several days, giving us an unexpected opportunity. Thank you, Paul. Please continue monitoring the situation and let me know when they're airborne. I relayed this information to Grace, who immediately saw the advantages. This is perfect timing. With Thomas out of town, we can file the emergency petitions and have them served at his office on Monday when he returns. The accounts will be frozen before he even realizes we're taking action. I left Grace's office with a strange mixture of dread and determination. The scale of Thomas's betrayal continued to expand, from an affair and financial deception to what now appeared to be plans for an international disappearance with our money. Yet each new revelation only strengthened my resolve to stop him before he could complete his scheme. When I arrived home, I found a text from Thomas. Emergency client situation in Florida. Flying down with team for weekend meetings. Back Sunday. Night. Sorry for the late notice. The calculated lie, phrased to sound like an inconvenient work obligation rather than a romantic getaway, ignited a fresh wave of anger. I typed back a simple, safe travels while imagining Thomas and Rachel boarding their private flight to paradise on my retirement funds. With Thomas away, I had an opportunity to search more thoroughly for evidence. I started in his home office, methodically examining every drawer, folder, and hiding place. The locked briefcase I'd discovered earlier remained a mystery without its key, but behind a row of financial reference books on his bookshelf, I found a manila envelope containing something unexpected: life insurance documentation. Thomas had increased his life insurance policy 6 months ago, raising the coverage from $1 million to $5 million. More surprising was the change in beneficiary. While our children remained secondary beneficiaries at 25% each, the primary beneficiary was now listed as the Mitchell Family Trust at 50%, an entity I'd never heard of. I photographed the documents, then continued searching. In a hidden compartment of his desk drawer, one I knew about from years of retrieving stamps and paper clips, I found a flash drive. Taking it to my laptop, I discovered it contained encrypted files that required a password to access. After several attempts with various combinations of dates and names significant to Thomas, I tried Rachel Porter, and the files opened. Inside was a comprehensive document titled Exit Strategy, detailing plans for transferring assets, establishing new identities, and relocating to Costa Rica, a country with limited extradition agreements with the United States. The document included timelines, contact information for offshore bankers and identity brokers, and contingency plans for various scenarios. Most disturbing was a section titled Our Integration, which outlined plans for Rachel to join him in Costa Rica after a cooling period of 3 to 6 months, during which she would gradually liquidate her U.S. assets and establish her own offshore accounts. There was no mention of provisions for Emily or Jason. In Thomas's elaborate escape plan, our children were simply left behind, collateral damage in his pursuit of a new life. I forwarded the entire contents of the flash drive to Grace with a simple message: evidence of intent to flee, see attached. Her response was immediate. Coming to your house. Don't touch anything else. This changes everything. While waiting for Grace, I called Laura, my voice shaking as I explained the latest developments. He was going to disappear, Laura. Just vanish with our money and abandon his own children. That son of a bitch, my sister said, her voice tight, with anger. I'm coming there tomorrow. No arguments. You shouldn't be alone in that house with his things. For once, I didn't protest. Having Laura's support through the coming confrontation would be invaluable. Grace arrived 40 minutes later with Walter in tow. They examined the flash drive contents carefully, making copies and annotations for the court filings. This is exactly what we needed, Grace said grimly. Proof of intent to defraud and flee. The courts will have no choice but to issue an immediate freeze on all accounts. We'll also request a travel restriction to prevent him from leaving the country. What about Rachel Porter? I asked. She's clearly complicit in this plan. We'll add her to the filings as a co-conspirator, Grace confirmed. Her assets will be subject to investigation as well, particularly any joint holdings or transfers from Thomas. Walter pointed to a section of the document detailing upcoming transfers. According to this, he's planning to move another $300,000 offshore next Wednesday. That's likely when he intended to trigger the final phase of his exit plan. The timing sent a chill through me. Next Wednesday was Emily's birthday, a day Thomas had always made special throughout her life. Had he intentionally chosen that date, knowing it would distract me from questioning his movements? Or was it simply convenient timing that held no significance for him anymore? What happens when he returns from Key West and finds out about the court orders? I asked. He'll be furious, Grace acknowledged, and potentially desperate, which is why you shouldn't be alone when he returns. The court orders will include a temporary restraining order preventing him from entering the marital home, but enforcement takes time. My sister is coming tomorrow, I said. She'll be staying with me for a few days. Good. I'd also recommend hiring private security, at least temporarily. Grace's expression was grave. Men like Thomas, wealthy, privileged, accustomed to controlling their environment, can become unpredictable when their plans unravel. The suggestion that Thomas might become dangerous was jarring. Despite everything I'd discovered, I still couldn't imagine him becoming physically threatening. But then I hadn't imagined he would steal our retirement or plan to abandon our children either. I'll arrange security, I agreed. What about the Mitchell Ventures documents? When do we play that card? Grace smiled grimly. We're filing those papers simultaneously. By Monday afternoon, Thomas will discover not only that his accounts are frozen and his travel restricted, but that his professional future is in jeopardy as well. The intellectual property claims will trigger automatic notifications to his firm's legal department. We spent the next several hours preparing for Monday's legal onslaught. Grace and Walter departed with copies of all the evidence, leaving me alone in the suddenly silent house. I wandered from room to room, seeing our home with new eyes, not as the sanctuary it had once been, but as the elaborate stage set for Thomas's years of deception. In our bedroom, I opened his closet and ran my fingers along the row of expensive suits, each one a costume for his performance as the devoted husband and father. How many of these suits had he worn while meeting with offshore bankers or identity brokers? How many times had he straightened these ties in the mirror, rehearsing lies he would tell me that evening? My phone buzzed with a text from Paul. Subjects confirmed on flight to Key West. Departed 4:30 p.m. Have arranged surveillance. At the destination. I thanked him, then sat on the edge of our bed, overwhelmed by the events of the day. Tomorrow, I would need to prepare for Laura's arrival and begin the painful process of explaining the situation to Emily and Jason. But tonight, I allowed myself to fully feel the grief and rage I'd been managing so carefully. Taking Thomas's pillow from the bed, I hurled it across the room, then sank to the floor, silent tears streaming down my face. I wept not just for the betrayal and the lost money, but for the death of the future I had believed in, the retirement years we had planned together, the grandchildren we would spoil, the quiet evenings we would share in the twilight of our lives. That future was gone, shattered by Thomas's calculated selfishness. But as my tears subsided, I remembered Grace's words from our first meeting. What do you want, Becky? I wanted justice. I wanted security. I wanted Thomas to face the consequences of his actions. And on Monday, when the legal machinery we had set in motion began to operate, he would discover just how thoroughly he had underestimated the woman he had tried to discard. Rising from the floor, I wiped my tears and straightened my shoulders. The time for grief had passed. Now, I needed to prepare for war. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows as I prepared the guest room for Laura's arrival. The familiar routine of changing sheets and fluffing pillows provided a momentary escape from the chaos my life had become. I had just finished when my phone rang, Emily calling from Chicago. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice bright. "Just confirming we're still on for next weekend? Dad texted saying he might have to reschedule because of work, but I've already booked my flight." My heart sank. Thomas was already laying groundwork to explain his potential absence, preparing excuses in case his exit strategy launched. Before Emily's visit, "We're absolutely still on," I assured her. "Your father's schedule can be unpredictable, but I'll be here no matter what. We'll make it special." Great. Oh, and I invited Jason to drive up from Richmond. Thought it would be nice to have the whole family together. The whole family. If only she knew how fractured that concept had become. But having both children visit might actually simplify things. I needed to warn them about their father's actions, preferably together. That's perfect, sweetheart. Can't wait to see you both. After hanging up, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Mitchell, this is Valerie Winters from Brunswick Investment Group. I'm the executive assistant to Mr. Henderson. Could you call me regarding an urgent matter? Mr. Henderson was Philip Henderson, the managing partner at Thomas's firm and one of the most powerful financial figures in Charlotte. Why would his assistant be contacting me directly? I called the number immediately. Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for returning my call, Valerie said, her tone professionally neutral. Mr. Henderson would like to meet with you privately. Would you be available for lunch today? The request was unexpected and concerning. Did Philip know something about Thomas's activities? Had the firm discovered irregularities? I'd be happy to meet with Mr. Henderson, I replied cautiously. May I ask what this concerns? Mr. Henderson prefers to discuss that in person. He suggested Harrington's at noon, if that works for you. Harrington's was one of Charlotte's most exclusive restaurants, frequented by the city's business elite. A public venue, but one where private conversations were respected, and where Thomas was unlikely to appear, given his supposed trip to Florida. Noon works perfectly. Please tell Mr. Henderson I'll be there. After disconnecting, I called Grace to inform her of this development. Be extremely careful, she warned. Henderson could be fishing for information about what we know. Thomas may have given him some sanitized version of events. Or he might have information we need, I countered. Philip Henderson has been with the firm for decades. If anyone knows about Thomas's professional activities, it's him. Just don't reveal our legal strategy, Grace insisted. Listen more than you speak, and call me immediately afterward. I agreed, then spent the next hour preparing for the meeting, selecting a conservative navy dress that conveyed both confidence and propriety. As I applied my makeup, I considered the various scenarios that might unfold. Was Henderson approaching as Thomas's ally, seeking to gauge my knowledge? Or had he discovered Thomas's deceptions independently? Harrington's maitre d' recognized me from previous events and led me directly to a secluded corner table where Philip Henderson waited. At 65, Philip remained imposingly tall, with a full head of silver hair and penetrating blue eyes. He stood as I approached, his expression inscrutable. Rebecca, thank you for coming on such short notice, he said, gesturing for me to sit. I apologize for the mystery, but this matter requires discretion. Of course, Philip. What can I help you with? He waited until the waiter had taken our orders and moved out of earshot before speaking. I've recently become aware of some concerning activities involving Thomas. Activities that could have serious implications for both the firm and your family. I maintained a neutral expression, unwilling to reveal how much I already knew. What kind of activities? Philip folded his hands on the table. Our compliance department flagged unusual patterns in Thomas's client billing and expense reports. Upon closer examination, we discovered discrepancies that suggested misappropriation of firm resources. When confronted yesterday, Thomas provided explanations that were insufficient. Yesterday? Thomas had been confronted by the firm before, leaving for Key West with Rachel. I see, I said carefully. And you're telling me this because the investigation has expanded beyond firm resources. Philip's expression hardened. We've uncovered evidence suggesting Thomas may have been leveraging proprietary trading algorithms in unauthorized ways. Algorithms that I believe originated with Mitchell Ventures. My pulse quickened. Philip knew about Mitchell Ventures, which meant he was aware of my majority ownership. This wasn't just a courtesy meeting, it was a strategic outreach. That's very interesting, I replied, maintaining my composure. Especially since those algorithms remain the intellectual property of Mitchell Ventures, with all rights reserved. Philip's eyes narrowed slightly. So you're aware of the ownership structure? I've always been aware, Philip. I'm the majority shareholder. A flicker of respect crossed his features. Thomas seemed to have forgotten that detail, Or perhaps he hoped everyone else had. He paused as the waiter delivered our meals, then continued once we were alone again. Rebecca, I'll be direct. Brunswick Investment Group has built its reputation on integrity. The preliminary findings regarding Thomas's activities are deeply troubling. If made public, they could damage not only Thomas's career, but potentially the firm's standing and my family's reputation, I added. Not to mention our financial security. Philip nodded. Precisely why I wanted to speak with you directly. I believe we may have aligned interests in resolving this situation discreetly. I took a sip of water, considering his words. What exactly are you proposing, Philip? A collaboration. Brunswick has resources that could help trace and potentially recover misappropriated funds. We also have considerable influence regarding Thomas's professional future. In exchange for your discretion about the firm's oversight lapses, we could ensure Thomas faces appropriate consequences while minimizing public scandal. The offer was unexpected, but potentially valuable. Brunswick's resources and influence could significantly strengthen my position. However, I needed to ensure their interests wouldn't override mine. I appreciate the offer, Philip, but I already have a legal team preparing to take action. How would this collaboration work in practical terms? Philip described a coordinated approach. Brunswick would handle the professional and financial consequences through internal channels, while supporting my legal efforts to recover diverted funds. They would provide documentation of Thomas's misuse of firm resources and unauthorized use of the Mitchell Ventures algorithms, evidence that would strengthen my position in divorce proceedings. In return, Philip concluded, we ask only that your claims focus on Thomas specifically, not on Brunswick's oversight processes. It was a reasonable request. Pursuing claims against Brunswick would be time-consuming and might dilute my efforts to hold Thomas accountable. Moreover, having the firm as an ally rather than an adversary could significantly expedite the recovery process. I'll need to consult with my attorney, I said. But your proposal has merit. Philip smiled for the first time. I expected nothing less. Your reputation for thoroughness precedes you, Rebecca. As lunch concluded, Philip handed me a business card with his private number written on the back. Call me when you've decided. But I recommend moving quickly. Thomas hasn't returned from his business trip yet. But when he does, things will accelerate rapidly. The slight pause before business trip confirmed my suspicion that Philip knew exactly where Thomas was and with whom. I'll be in touch. By this evening, I promised. And Philip? Thank you for approaching me directly. He nodded, his expression grave. Thomas has underestimated you, Rebecca. That was his first mistake. Back in my car, I immediately called Grace and relayed the conversation. Henderson's offering a significant advantage, Grace acknowledged after hearing the details. Brunswick's cooperation could expedite asset recovery and provide additional leverage regarding the Mitchell Ventures intellectual property. Do you think we can trust them? I asked, navigating through downtown Charlotte toward home. Trust but verify, Grace advised. I'll draft a formal collaboration agreement that protects your interests while leveraging their resources. If they're sincere, this alliance could be extremely valuable. By the time Laura arrived mid-afternoon, I had spoken with Grace 3 more times, finalizing our approach to Brunswick. We would accept their collaboration with specific conditions and formalized information-sharing protocols. Laura embraced me fiercely at the door, her familiar presence and immediate comfort. At 54, she remained remarkably similar to her college-aged self, the same cropped dark hair and direct gaze, only now framed by laugh lines that spoke to her expressive nature. You look exhausted, she declared, setting down her suitcase in the foyer. When did you last sleep properly? Sometime last week, I admitted with a weak smile. But I'm holding up. Laura followed me to the kitchen where I had prepared tea, listening intently as I updated her on the latest developments, including the unexpected alliance with Brunswick. So Thomas is being investigated by his own firm? Laura shook her head in disbelief. The walls are closing in on him and he doesn't even know it yet. He'll find out soon enough. Brunswick is planning to suspend him when he returns on Monday, pending their internal investigation. Laura squeezed my hand across the table. How are you really doing, Becky? Beyond the logistics and legal strategies? The simple question, asked with genuine concern rather than the professional detachment I'd grown accustomed to from Grace and her team, cracked my carefully maintained facade. Tears welled in my eyes. I'm so angry, Laura. Not just about the money or the affair, but about the years of lies. I keep replaying moments in my mind, vacations, anniversaries, family dinners, wondering if any of it was real, or if Thomas was just going through the motions while planning his escape. Laura moved to sit beside me, her arm around my shoulders. Thomas you married, the one who helped raise Emily and Jason, who supported your dreams. That person was real. People change, sometimes in ways we can't comprehend, but it doesn't erase the truth of what came before. Her words provided a strange comfort. The past 3 decades of my life hadn't been a complete fiction, even if they had ended in betrayal. As evening approached, I called Philip Henderson to accept Brunswick's collaboration offer, with the conditions Grace had outlined. Philip agreed readily, promising to have Brunswick's legal team contact Grace in the morning to formalize the arrangement. We've assigned a security team to monitor Thomas's return, Philip added. He's scheduled on a commercial flight from Key West tomorrow evening. If that changes, we'll alert you immediately. The firm was tracking Thomas's movements. Further, confirmation that Brunswick's investigation was serious and comprehensive. After dinner, Laura and I sat in the living room reviewing my preparations for confronting Thomas. The legal documents were ready for filing first thing Monday morning. Brunswick's security team would be monitoring Thomas's arrival at the airport. A private security guard would be stationed outside my house starting tomorrow. What about the children? Laura asked. When will you tell them? I have a video call scheduled with both of them tomorrow afternoon. I won't reveal everything, but they need to be warned about their father's actions, especially if he tries to contact them for help. Laura nodded her approval. And what about Rachel Porter? Will she be returning with Thomas? According to Paul's surveillance in Key West, Thomas and Rachel had been staying at an exclusive oceanfront resort, dining at expensive restaurants, and shopping at luxury boutiques, all presumably charged to Thomas's credit cards or paid for with our retirement money. Paul's latest update indicates they have separate return flights. Rachel is booked on an earlier flight, arriving around noon. Thomas follows in the evening. Strategic, Laura observed. Maintaining the appearance of separate trips. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from a blocked number. Hesitantly, I answered. Mrs. Mitchell? A woman's voice, unfamiliar and slightly hesitant. This is Megan Taylor. I used to work as Thomas's executive assistant at Brunswick. Used to, I repeated, putting the call on speaker so Laura could hear. I left the firm last year. Thomas said I was underperforming, but... She paused. The real reason was that I discovered some irregularities in his expense reports and client billings. When I questioned him, he had me transferred. Then eventually, pushed out. My interest sharpened immediately. Why are you calling me now, Ms. Taylor? I saw Thomas today in Key West with Rachel Porter. I'm here on vacation with my fiancé. Her voice grew stronger. Seeing them together, spending money so carelessly while my career was derailed for trying to do the right thing, it made me realize I should have spoken up sooner. What kind of irregularities did you discover? I asked, exchanging significant glances with Laura. Double billing clients, charging personal expenses to company accounts, manipulating performance metrics to increase his bonuses. Megan's words tumbled out rapidly now. I documented everything before I left, thinking I might need it if he tried to damage my reputation in the industry. I never used it, but I kept the files. Those files could be extremely valuable, Ms. Taylor, I said carefully, would you be willing to share them? That's why I'm calling. I think it's time someone held Thomas accountable. She paused. But I need assurance that my involvement won't become public. I'm finally rebuilding my career at a new firm. I can guarantee discretion, I assured her. My attorney can draw up a confidentiality agreement that protects your identity. We arranged for Megan to email her documentation to Grace the following morning. After ending the call, Laura and I sat in stunned silence. The universe is delivering allies from unexpected places, Laura said finally. First Brunswick, now this former assistant. Thomas has left a trail of victims, I replied. People he used and discarded when they no longer served his purposes, just like he planned to do with me. That night, as Laura settled into the EI guest room, I stood in my bedroom doorway, surveying the space Thomas and I had shared for so many years. Tomorrow, he would return, expecting to find his oblivious wife waiting with dinner and normal conversation. Instead, he would find a locked door, a security guard, and the first tremors of his world collapsing. I closed the bedroom door and prepared for sleep, mentally rehearsing the difficult conversation I would have with my children tomorrow. They deserved the truth. Not the complete, brutal truth, perhaps, but enough to understand why their family was about to change forever. As I drifted toward sleep, my phone buzzed with a final update from Paul. Subjects separated for the evening. Female alone in a resort bar. Subject in room making multiple calls, appearing agitated. Was Thomas receiving warnings from allies at Brunswick? Has someone tipped him off about the coming investigation? Or was he simply arguing with Rachel, their romantic getaway soured by the realities of their complicated situation? Whatever the cause of his agitation, it was merely a preview of what awaited him upon his return to Charlotte. Thomas had spent our retirement fund on his mistress, believing I would never discover his betrayal. What he didn't know was that I now controlled not just his present circumstances, but his entire professional future. Tomorrow the confrontation will begin in earnest. And I was finally ready. Sunday morning arrived with a gentle rain tapping against the windows, the gray skies matching the solemnity of the day ahead. Laura was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, preparing a more elaborate breakfast than I'd seen in months. You need proper fuel, she explained, sliding a plate of French toast and fresh berries in front of me. Today's going to be challenging. She wasn't wrong. In a few hours, I would be explaining to my children that their father had betrayed our family in ways they couldn't imagine. Then, by evening, Thomas would return to find his carefully constructed world beginning to unravel. The security company called, Laura mentioned, pouring coffee. Their agent will arrive at 3, ex-police officer named Carter. I nodded, grateful for her practical management of details I was too overwhelmed to handle. Grace emailed that the court filings are ready for submission first thing tomorrow. Brunswick's legal team has already provided supporting documentation. Phone buzzed with a text from Paul. Subject still at resort. Checked flight status. Still booked for 5:30 p.m. departure. At least Thomas was maintaining his original schedule, which meant our preparations could proceed as planned. I forwarded the update to Grace, who responded immediately. Perfect timing. Court orders should be processed by the time he lands. After breakfast, Laura helped me prepare for my video call with Emily and Jason. We moved to my home office, where the built-in bookshelves and tasteful artwork would provide a reassuring backdrop. Visual continuity in a conversation that would upend their understanding of our family. How much will you tell them? Laura asked as I arranged my notes. Enough for them to understand why Thomas and I will be separating, and why they shouldn't provide him with financial assistance if he asks. I sighed, rubbing my temples. They don't need the sordid details about Rachel Porter or the full extent of his exit strategy. Laura squeezed my shoulder supportively. You're protecting them while still being honest. That's the right balance. At precisely 2 o'clock, my laptop chimed with an incoming call. Emily's face appeared first, her dark hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, her Chicago apartment visible behind her. Moments later, Jason joined the call from Richmond, looking slightly rumpled in a university sweatshirt. "Hey, Mom," Emily greeted me brightly. "Is Dad joining?" "Not today," I replied, maintaining a calm demeanor despite my racing heart. "This is just between us. I have something important to discuss with you both." Their expressions shifted immediately, sensing the seriousness in my tone. Jason leaned closer to his camera. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath. "I'm afraid not. There's no easy way to say this, so I'll be direct. Your father and I will be separating. I'll be filing for divorce tomorrow." Stunned silence filled the screen. Emily recovered first, her voice small. "Why? I mean, I know you guys have been busy with your own things, but divorce? That seems so sudden." "It may seem sudden to you," I acknowledged, "but there have been issues developing for some time. The specific reasons are complicated, but they involve your father making financial decisions that have put our family's security at risk." Jason's brow furrowed. "What kind of financial decisions?" I chose my words carefully. "Your father has been moving substantial amounts of money from our retirement accounts without my knowledge or consent. This money has been directed toward personal interests that don't involve our family." Emily's eyes widened. "Are you saying Dad stole from you?" "In essence, yes. The legal term is marital waste. He's depleted accounts we spent decades building together." "How bad is it?" Jason asked, his analytical mind immediately assessing the practical implications. "Significant. Nearly $2 million. Dollars from our retirement funds," Emily gasped. $2 million? But that's most of your retirement, isn't it?" I nodded. "It is, which brings me to the difficult part of this conversation. In the coming days, your father may contact you with unusual requests. He might ask for help transferring money, or access to accounts, or assistance with travel arrangements. If he does, I need you both to decline and contact me immediately." Jason's expression hardened. "You think he'll try to use us?" "I hope not," I said honestly. "But I need you to be prepared if he does. This situation has revealed aspects of your father's character that none of us fully understood before." Emily wiped away a tear. "Is that why he's been acting strange lately? Last month, when I called him about grad school funding, he got really evasive and changed the subject." The revelation stung. Thomas had already been deflecting Emily's educational needs, likely knowing the money he'd promised her was now funding his life with Rachel. "That's probably related, yes." I kept my voice steady, refusing to burden them with my anger. "I want you both to know that despite these financial complications, I'll do everything possible to ensure your futures remain secure. Your education and well-being are my highest priorities." "Mom," Jason said quietly, "are you going to be okay? Financially, I mean?" His concern, so adult, so practical, brought a lump to my throat. "I'm taking steps to address the situation. I have a strong legal team, and there are aspects of your father's professional activities that give me certainty, leverage." Emily leaned forward. "What do you mean, leverage?" "It's complicated, but it relates to intellectual property from a business your father and I started years ago. The important thing is that I'm not without resources in this situation." We talked for another hour, their questions becoming more specific as the initial shock wore off. I navigated each inquiry carefully, providing enough truth to help them understand the gravity of the situation without burdening them with details that would damage their relationship with Thomas beyond repair. Despite his betrayal, he was still their father. "Will you be at the house when Dad gets back?" Jason asked as our conversation wound down. "No," I said firmly. "I've arranged for security, and your father won't be staying at the house while legal proceedings are underway." "Security?" Emily's voice rose in alarm. "Do you think he might Hurt you? It's just a precaution, I assured her, silently cursing myself for raising unnecessary fears. Your father has never been violent, and I don't expect that to change. The security is primarily to ensure that court orders regarding the property are respected. As we prepared to end the call, Emily asked softly, "Should we still come next? Weekend? Is that too soon?" "I would love to see you both," I said sincerely. "By next weekend, the initial legal proceedings will be underway, and having you here would be a comfort. But I understand if you need time to process all this." They exchanged glances, having one of those silent sibling communications that had always amazed me. "We'll be there," Jason decided. "You shouldn't be alone right now." After ending the call, I sat motionless, emotionally drained. Laura entered with a cup of tea, her expression questioning. "They took it better than I expected," I said, accepting the tea gratefully. "They're shocked and confused, but they understand the seriousness of the situation." "They're adults now," Laura reminded me. "And they've always been perceptive kids. They probably sensed something was wrong long before you did." The thought was both comforting and painful. Had my children been protecting me from their own concerns about Thomas's behavior? The afternoon progressed with methodical preparation. The security guard, Michael Carter, arrived at 3. A stocky, middle-aged man with observant eyes and a reassuringly professional demeanor. He conducted a thorough assessment of the property, identifying potential vulnerabilities and establishing protocols for monitoring Thomas's return. "I'll be stationed outside in my vehicle from now until relief arrives tomorrow morning," he explained. "If Mr. Mitchell appears, I'll intercept him before he reaches the house and explain the court order situation." "And if he becomes difficult?" I asked, not entirely sure what to expect from Thomas when confronted. "I'm trained to de-escalate," Carter assured me, "and I have direct contact with local police if necessary, though I doubt it will come to that." At 4 o'clock, Paul called with an update. "Thomas has checked out of the resort and is en route to the airport. Rachel Porter departed on her earlier flight and should be landing in Charlotte shortly." "Any indication that Thomas suspects something is wrong?" I asked. "Hard to say definitively, but he appears tense. Made several calls this morning, including one that seemed particularly heated. He's traveling alone. No sign of Porter accompanying him to the airport." The heated call could have been with Brunswick contacts warning him about tomorrow's meeting, or perhaps with Rachel herself. Either way, Thomas was returning in a state of agitation, which would only intensify when he discovered what awaited him. As evening approached, Grace called to confirm final preparations. "The court filings are ready for submission at 8 a.m. sharp. Brunswick's legal team has provided all the necessary documentation about the intellectual property issues. We expect the emergency injunctions to be granted by noon at the latest." "What happens if Thomas tries to access accounts before then?" I asked, picturing him making one final desperate transfer to his offshore holdings. "Brunswick has already implemented administrative freezes on all his company accounts and credit cards," Grace explained. "They're citing their internal investigation protocols. It's not as bulletproof as a court order, but it significantly limits his options." Thomas's carefully constructed escape plan was crumbling before he even knew he'd been discovered. The thought brought a grim satisfaction. At 6:30, as Laura and I were preparing a light dinner, my phone rang with a call from an unfamiliar Miami number. Cautiously, I answered. "Mrs. Mitchell. This is Captain Alex Rivera with Miami-Dade Police Department. I'm calling regarding your husband, Thomas Mitchell." My stomach dropped. "Has something happened to him?" "No, ma'am. Mr. Mitchell is fine. However, he was involved in a disturbance at Miami International Airport. He became aggressive with airline staff when his credit card was declined for an upgrade to first class. When security intervened, he made threats and used abusive language, resulting in his removal from the flight. Thomas had been kicked off his flight for causing a scene over a declined credit card. Likely one of the company cards Brunswick had frozen. "I see," I said, processing this unexpected development. Is he being charged with anything? Not at this time. He's been issued a warning and released. However, he's been placed on the airline's no-fly list for the next 24 hours, which means he'll need to make alternative travel arrangements. After thanking the officer, I immediately called Grace and explained the situation. "This actually works in our favor," she said thoughtfully. "If he's stranded in Miami overnight, we'll have the court orders in place before he even returns to Charlotte. His options will be severely limited by the time he makes it back." I relayed this update to Carter, who agreed to maintain his surveillance position despite Thomas's delayed return. Better safe than sorry. Laura and I settled in for a tense evening, jumping slightly at every car that passed on our quiet street. Around 9, my phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Stuck in Miami. Due to flight cancellation. Weather issues. Home tomorrow." Weather issues. Another lie to mask his embarrassing airport meltdown. I didn't bother responding. Shortly after, Paul called again. "Thomas has checked into an airport hotel in Miami, based on information from my hotel contact. He attempted to use 3 different credit cards before finding one that wasn't declined. He's making numerous calls from his room. Probably trying to figure out why his cards are being declined," Laura commented when I shared this update. "And probably getting increasingly desperate," I added. "The walls are closing in, and he doesn't even know the full extent of it yet." As midnight approached, I received an unexpected text from Rachel Porter. "We need to talk. It's important. Please call me." Attached was her phone number. I stared at the message in disbelief. After months of seeing my husband behind my back and helping him spend our retirement funds, now she wanted to talk? "Are you going to call her?" Laura asked, reading over my shoulder. "Not tonight," I decided. "Whatever she wants to say can wait until after the court filings tomorrow. This could be a trap. Thomas might have put her up to it to gauge what I know." Laura nodded approvingly. "Smart. Keep them both off balance." I forwarded Rachel's message to Grace, who responded, "Good decision not to engage. We'll add this to evidence of ongoing communication between them." Before going to bed, I received one final update from Paul, who had arranged surveillance at Rachel's condominium. Subject returned from the airport at approximately 7 p.m. Has not left residence. Multiple deliveries received, including wine and food. Currently has lights on in the main living area. So Rachel was settling in for the evening, perhaps celebrating her return from a luxury weekend with my husband, funded by my retirement savings. Did she know about Thomas's airport meltdown? Was she having second thoughts about their relationship now that his financial house of cards was beginning to collapse? As I prepared for sleep, I found myself oddly calm despite the storm gathering around us. Tomorrow would bring the formal beginning of legal proceedings that would forever alter our lives. Thomas would discover that his carefully constructed escape plan had been dismantled. Brunswick would inform him of their investigation and his suspension. Court orders would freeze what remained of our assets, and the Mitchell Ventures' intellectual property claims would threaten his professional future. The man who had spent our retirement fund on his mistress, believing I would never find out, was about to discover that I controlled far more than he had ever realized. His entire future, financial, professional, and personal, now rested in the hands of the woman he had so gravely underestimated. I fell asleep with that knowledge providing a small measure of justice in a situation that had seemed so hopelessly unfair just days before. The confrontation was coming, and for the first time in our 30-year marriage, I held all the power. Monday morning dawned clear and bright, the cheerful weather at odds with the gravity of the day ahead. I woke early, having slept surprisingly well despite the looming confrontation. Perhaps it was the security of knowing Carter was stationed outside, or maybe just the relief of finally taking action after days of discovery and planning. Laura was already dressed when I came downstairs, her suitcase by the door. "I've got to head back to Asheville for a meeting I couldn't reschedule, but I'll return tomorrow evening," she explained, pouring me coffee. Are you sure you'll be okay? I'll be fine, I assured her. Carter's team will maintain surveillance, and Thomas is still stuck in Miami trying to find a flight back. She embraced me tightly. Call me immediately if anything changes. And remember, you're stronger than he thinks. After Laura departed, I checked my phone to find several updates. Waiting. Paul had confirmed that Thomas was booked on a 1 p.m. flight from Miami, scheduled to arrive in Charlotte at 3:15 p.m. He'd managed to secure the ticket using his personal credit card, apparently the only one not yet frozen by Brunswick's administrative hold. Grace had texted that she was heading to the courthouse to file our emergency petitions, with confirmation expected by noon. Walter Simmons, the forensic accountant, had completed his preliminary analysis and documented over $2.3 million in diverted marital assets, even more than I'd initially calculated. Most surprising was a voicemail from Philip Henderson. Rebecca, I wanted you to know that Thomas called several Brunswick partners over the weekend, including myself, making rather desperate inquiries about account access issues. We maintained the cover story about system upgrades causing temporary restrictions. He's clearly agitated. My security team will meet his flight this afternoon to escort him directly to my office. I'll update you afterward. Brunswick was intercepting Thomas at the airport, an unexpected development that would further derail his attempts to access whatever funds remained in his accounts. At 9:30 a.m., just as I was preparing to review additional documentation for Grace, my doorbell rang. Carter's voice came through the intercom system. Mrs. Mitchell, Rachel Porter is at the gate requesting to speak with you. Would you like me to send her away? Rachel was here? Audacity didn't begin to describe her showing up at my home after everything that had happened. I'll speak with her, I decided after a moment's hesitation. Whatever she wanted, it might provide useful information. Before Thomas returned, I'll escort her to the door and remain nearby, Carter said, professionally neutral. 5 minutes later, Rachel Porter stood in my entryway, younger and more nervous-looking than the confident seductress I had imagined. Dressed in a conservative, gray pantsuit with minimal makeup, she appeared surprisingly ordinary, even slightly disheveled. Thank you for seeing me, Mrs. Mitchell, she began, her voice tightly controlled. I realize this is unconventional. That's one way of putting it, I replied coolly, leading her to the living room but not offering refreshments. This wasn't a social call. Rachel perched uneasily on the edge of a chair, clutching her handbag like a shield. I imagine you know who I am by now. Thomas's mistress and accomplice in financial fraud. Yes, I'm aware. She flinched at my bluntness but didn't deny it. I deserve that. But there are things you should know. Things that might help you protect yourself. My skepticism must have shown, because she hurried to continue. Thomas lied to me from the beginning. He said you two were separating, that the divorce was already in process but being kept quiet for financial reasons. She exhaled sharply. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. It wasn't until this weekend in Key West that I realized the extent of his deception. What happened in Key West? I asked, curiosity overcoming my initial impulse to dismiss. Everything she said. Thomas received multiple calls that clearly upset him. He became increasingly agitated, making excuses to step away from dinner or leave me at the pool while he made more calls. She twisted her hands in her lap. Saturday night, I overheard him arguing with someone about account access and transfer authorizations. When I questioned him, he exploded, saying everything was falling apart because they were onto him. They being Brunswick Investment Group, I clarified, watching her reaction. Rachel nodded. I think so. He mentioned Philip Henderson specifically, calling him a sanctimonious bastard who was blocking legitimate transactions. So Brunswick's administrative holds had indeed triggered Thomas's paranoia, even before he knew about my involvement. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, still suspicious of her motives. You've been involved with my husband for months. Helping him spend my retirement money. Why the sudden attack of conscience? Rachel's carefully composed expression cracked. Because I discovered I'm not the only one. There's at least one other woman, someone in Boston that he visits during his quarterly review meetings. And because she hesitated, then continued in a rush. Because I found documentation in his briefcase about offshore accounts and property in Costa Rica that he never mentioned to me. My pulse quickened. He told you about moving abroad? He said we'd eventually relocate to Costa Rica for tax purposes, but that it would be years in the future after his divorce settlement with you was finalized. She looked down. The papers I found indicated he was planning to move within weeks, with no mention of me accompanying him. Thomas had been planning to abandon Rachel just as he had intended to abandon me and our children. She was another disposable piece in his elaborate escape strategy. I see, I said, studying her with new understanding. You're here because you've realized he was using you. Partly, she admitted, but also because I've done something unforgivable by participating in this, however unwittingly. I never wanted to hurt another woman this way. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a flash drive. This contains copies of emails, transfer records, and contact information for the offshore bankers Thomas has been working with. I took it from his laptop while he was showering yesterday morning. I made no move to take it. Why should I trust anything from you? You shouldn't, she acknowledged. But you can verify the information independently, and I'm prepared to provide a sworn statement about everything I know, including my role in the relationship. Her offer was potentially valuable, especially if she was willing to testify about Thomas's statements and intentions, but I remained wary of her sudden cooperation. What do you want in exchange? I asked directly. Nothing from you, Rachel said, setting the flash drive on the coffee table between us. I've already resigned from Brunswick. I'm moving back to Atlanta where my family lives. She stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Mrs. Mitchell. What I did was inexcusable, regardless of what Thomas told me about your marriage. I just want to do one thing right in this mess. As she turned to leave, I found myself asking, Did you love him? Rachel paused, her back to me. I thought I did. Now I realize I loved a person who doesn't exist. She glanced back, her expression a mixture of regret and resolution. Be careful when he returns. The man I saw in Key West when things started, unraveling. He wasn't the charming, controlled person I thought I knew. He was frightening. After she departed, escorted to her car by Carter, I immediately called Grace to relay the conversation and arrange for the flash drive to be collected for forensic analysis. Her cooperation could be extremely valuable, Grace acknowledged, particularly her willingness to provide a sworn statement about Thomas's intentions regarding Costa Rica. Do you think she's sincere? I asked, still processing the unexpected encounter. It doesn't matter, Grace replied pragmatically. If the information she provided is verifiable and useful, her motives are secondary. People turn on their accomplices for all sorts of reasons: self-preservation, revenge, genuine remorse. The result is the same. Grace had good news of her own. The emergency petitions had been filed successfully, with the judge indicating preliminary approval. The formal orders freezing Thomas's accounts and restricting his travel would be issued by early afternoon, before his flight from Miami landed. Brunswick's legal team has been extraordinarily helpful, Grace added. They've provided documentation that strengthens our case regarding both the financial misappropriation and the Mitchell Ventures intellectual property claims. Thomas is going to find himself completely cornered when he returns. After our call ended, I notified Paul about Rachel's visit and forwarded him the surveillance footage Carter had recorded of her arrival and departure. She appeared genuinely distressed, I noted, and her warning about Thomas's state of mind aligns with what we've heard from other sources. Paul's response was cautious but reassuring. We'll maintain elevated security protocols regardless of his apparent mental state. Additional personnel will be in place before his flight lands. As noon approached, my phone rang with a call from Philip Henderson. Rebecca, I've just received word from Miami. Thomas attempted to board an earlier flight using a colleague's credit card information, which he apparently memorized. The airline flagged it as potential fraud, and he's now being detained by airport security for questioning. The situation was deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. Thomas was growing increasingly desperate, now resorting to credit card fraud in his attempts to return to Charlotte. Will he be arrested? I asked, unsure whether to be relieved or concerned by this development. That depends on whether his colleague presses charges. We're attempting to contact him now. Philip's tone was grim. This behavior demonstrates a troubling escalation. I've instructed our security team to treat Thomas as high risk when he eventually arrives. By early afternoon, the legal machinery was fully in motion. Grace called to confirm that the judge had signed all our requested orders. A freeze on all known accounts, restrictions on Thomas's access to the marital home, temporary control of Mitchell Ventures' assets assigned to me, and travel restrictions preventing Thomas from leaving the country. The orders are being entered into the system now, Grace explained. They'll be legally binding by the time Thomas lands, assuming he manages to get on a flight. The assuming proved prescient. An hour later, Paul called with another update. Thomas has been released without charges, but he missed the 1 p.m. flight. He's booked on a 5:30 p.m. departure, arriving Charlotte at 7:45 p.m. My source at the airline says he was extremely confrontational with staff, demanding priority boarding, and making threats about their jobs. Thomas's carefully cultivated image of professional charm was crumbling under pressure, revealing the volatile personality beneath. How had I never seen this side of him in 30 years of marriage? Or had it developed gradually, nurtured by the growing web of deception he'd created? At 4 o'clock, Walter Simmons called with findings from his examination of the flash drive Rachel had provided. The information appears legitimate and extremely valuable, he reported. It includes account numbers and contact details for 3 previously unknown offshore holdings, plus email exchanges with property managers in Costa Rica discussing a key villa purchased under the name James Mitchell, obviously a slight variation of Thomas's name. Can we recover any of those funds? I asked, hoping that perhaps not all of our retirement savings were lost. Potentially, Walter said cautiously. With these account details and the court orders already in place, we can file additional freezing requests through international banking treaties. Recovery is complex but possible, especially with evidence of fraudulent intent. The pieces were falling into place more rapidly than I could have imagined just days ago. Thomas's carefully constructed escape plan was disintegrating from multiple directions simultaneously. Brunswick's investigation, our legal filings, Rachel's betrayal, and his own increasingly erratic behavior. As evening approached, I received a call from Detective Anthony Warwick, the financial crimes officer who had contacted me earlier. Mrs. Mitchell, we've received formal notification of the civil proceedings regarding your husband's financial activities. Given the magnitude of the misappropriation and the evidence of systematic fraud, we're opening a criminal investigation as well. The prospect of criminal charges hadn't been part of my initial plan. I had focused primarily on recovering assets and protecting my financial future. But the detective's words triggered a realization that Thomas's actions weren't just a betrayal of our marriage. They potentially constituted criminal fraud. What would a criminal investigation involve? I asked, trying to process this new dimension. We'll review the evidence already gathered in the civil proceedings, interview witnesses including Ms. Porter, and investigate the offshore transfers for potential money laundering violations. Detective Warwick's tone was matter-of-fact. If charges are filed, they could include wire fraud, identity theft based on the credit card incident in Miami, and possibly tax evasion. The potential consequences for Thomas were becoming increasingly severe, beyond divorce, beyond professional disgrace, now extending to possible criminal prosecution. It was justice, certainly, but the scale of the destruction left me momentarily breathless. After hanging up with the detective, I sat in my study watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. In a few hours, Thomas would land in Charlotte, expecting to return to his normal life while continuing to execute his escape plan. Instead, he would be met by Brunswick's security team, served with multiple court orders, and informed of pending criminal investigations. My phone buzzed with a text message from Thomas. "Flight delayed again. This is ridiculous. Don't wait up." No mention of Brunswick's inquiries about his professional activities, no acknowledgement of the multiple declined credit cards, just the same dismissive assumption that I remained oblivious to his true circumstances. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say via text message. The next communication between us would occur through attorneys, in the formal language of legal proceedings that would dismantle the life we had built together. Carter knocked gently on the study door, informing me that his relief had arrived, a female security officer named Diane who would remain overnight. "We've been notified of Mr. Mitchell's delayed flight," he explained. "All security protocols remain in place and will be alerted as soon as he lands." I thanked him for his professionalism throughout this tense day, then retreated to the kitchen to prepare a light dinner. The house felt eerily quiet with Laura gone, the familiar spaces now charged with anticipation of the confrontation to come. I ate. I reviewed the events that had led to this moment, the accidental discovery of Thomas's secret folder, the systematic investigation of his betrayal, the gathering of allies from unexpected quarters, and the legal strategy that now had him cornered from every direction. In just 1 week, I had transformed from an unsuspecting wife to the architect of a comprehensive campaign to reclaim my financial security and hold Thomas accountable for his betrayal. The woman he had underestimated, the wife he had planned to abandon without resources, now controlled his fate more completely than he could have imagined. My phone rang again, Grace with a final update before Thomas's arrival. "The Brunswick team just confirmed they'll intercept Thomas at the airport and bring him directly to their offices for an immediate suspension meeting. The court orders will be served there, with security present. He won't be permitted to return to the house or access any accounts before these orders are presented." "What do you expect his reaction to be?" I asked, picturing Thomas's face as his world collapsed around him. Grace's voice was grim. "Based on his increasingly erratic behavior, I anticipate extreme agitation, possibly including threats or attempts to contact you directly. Under no circumstances should you engage with him tonight. Any communication must go through proper legal channels." I assured her I would maintain a strict distance, with security ensuring Thomas couldn't approach the house. After we hung up, I sat by the window watching darkness descend on the neighborhood, streetlights flickering on one by one. Tomorrow, the full extent of Thomas's betrayal would become public knowledge within our social circle. The coming weeks would bring legal proceedings, financial negotiations, and the painful process of dismantling 3 decades of shared life. Our children would have to navigate the complicated reality of their father's actions, and I would need to rebuild both financial security and emotional stability. But tonight, as I waited for the inevitable storm, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The worst had already happened: the betrayal, the theft, the lies, and I had survived. More than survived. I had found strength I didn't know I possessed, allies I never expected to have, and a clarity about my future that had been missing for years. Thomas had spent our retirement fund on his mistress, believing I would never discover his betrayal. What he didn't realize was that his greatest miscalculation wasn't the money he had stolen or the escape he had planned. It was underestimating the woman whose future he thought he controlled. The call came at 8:37 p.m. Thomas's plane had landed, and Brunswick's security team had successfully intercepted him at the gate. Philip Henderson's voice was tense but controlled as he updated me. "He's being escorted to our offices now. He attempted to refuse, but when informed that police would be called if he didn't comply, he reluctantly agreed to come. "How did he seem?" I asked, picturing Thomas's face as his carefully constructed world began to crumble. Agitated, confused, demanding answers about his accounts that no one at the airport could provide. Philip paused. "Rebecca, I should warn you, based on his current state, I expect an explosive reaction when he's presented with the full situation." I thanked Philip for the warning and alerted Diane, the security officer, that events were accelerating. She immediately conducted another perimeter check of the property and confirmed that all security systems were active. At 9:15 p.m., Grace called from Brunswick's offices. "I'm here with the legal team. Thomas just arrived and is being held in a conference room. He hasn't been told why he's here yet, just that there's an urgent matter requiring his immediate attention." "Who will speak to him first?" I asked, grateful that Grace had arranged to be present for this critical moment. "Philip Henderson will inform him of Brunswick's internal investigation and immediate suspension. Then I'll present the court orders. The criminal investigators have asked to be notified once we've completed our part, but they won't be present for this initial meeting." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Keep me updated. And Grace, thank you for everything." At 9:30 p.m., the waiting became unbearable. I poured myself a small glass of wine, something I rarely did on weeknights, and sat in the living room, staring at the family photos arranged on the mantel. Images of Thomas and me in happier times, our wedding day, Emily's graduation, Jason's first baseball game, moments that had seemed genuine at the time, but now felt like artifacts from a fiction I had unwittingly participated in. My phone rang again at 10:03 p.m. Grace again, her voice tight with tension. "It's done. The orders have been served. Thomas has been officially suspended from Brunswick pending investigation. His credentials have been revoked, and he's been informed of the Mitchell Ventures intellectual property claims." "How did he react?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Initially, with denial. He claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that he had legitimate reasons for the transfers. When confronted with specific evidence, the offshore accounts, the Costa Rica property, the emails with Rachel Porter, he became..." She hesitated. "What, Grace?" "Volatile. Security had to intervene when he attempted to leave. He's demanding to speak with you, claiming you've been manipulated by jealous colleagues and incompetent lawyers. Classic Thomas, unable to accept responsibility, immediately looking for others to blame." "Where is he now?" "Still at Brunswick's offices. The restraining order has been explained to him, making it clear he cannot return to the house. They're arranging for him to be taken to a hotel." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Thomas. I showed Grace the screen. "Do not answer," she warned. "Any communication must go through legal channels now. His emotional state is extremely unstable, and direct contact would be counterproductive." I declined the call, then watched as text messages began to flood in. "Becky, this is insane. Call me. These people are lying to you. This is all a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. Don't let them turn you against me." And finally, when I didn't respond, "You'll regret this. You have no idea what you've done." The last message, its threatening tone and capital letters, sent a chill through me. I forwarded the text to Grace and Detective Warwick, then silenced my phone. At 11:30 p.m., Philip called with a final update for the night. Thomas has been escorted to the Marriott downtown. His access cards to Brunswick have been deactivated, and hotel security has been advised of the situation. He's been informed that any attempt to approach you or the house will result in his immediate arrest. I thanked Philip, then prepared for bed, though I doubted sleep would come easily. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, meetings with Grace to plan next steps, continued coordination with Brunswick's investigation, and the inevitable ripple effects through our social circle as news of Thomas's suspension spread. Despite the Security measures and legal protections now in place, I found myself checking the locks twice, listening for unfamiliar sounds as the house settled for the night. The Thomas I had known for 30 years seemed incapable of violence, but the Thomas, who emerged under pressure in Miami and at Brunswick's offices, was a stranger, unpredictable and potentially dangerous. Morning arrived after a fitful night's sleep. I checked my phone to find 17 missed calls from Thomas, voicemail box full, and dozens of increasingly desperate text messages. I forwarded them all to Grace without reading beyond the previews, following her strict instructions to avoid direct engagement. Paul called at 7 a.m. with an update. Thomas checked out of the Marriott at 6 a.m. He took a taxi to Rachel, Porter's condominium, but was refused entry by building security, who had been advised of the restraining order. He's currently at a cafe 3 blocks from Brunswick's offices, making calls. So Thomas had tried to seek refuge with Rachel, unaware that she had already betrayed him by providing me with crucial evidence. His options were narrowing by the hour. Grace arrived at my house at 9 a.m., accompanied by Walter Simmons and a Brunswick staff attorney named Melissa Cheng. We gathered in the dining room to review next steps. "The immediate crisis has been managed," Grace began, "but now we need to focus on long-term strategy. Thomas has retained counsel, Martin Graves from Davidson and Partners. He's aggressive but practical. If presented with overwhelming evidence, he typically advises clients to settle rather than endure prolonged litigation." "What's our position on settlement?" I asked, uncertain whether I wanted this resolved quickly or was prepared for a protracted battle to extract every possible consequence from Thomas. "We negotiate from absolute strength," Grace advised. "The evidence is devastating. Financial fraud, multiple affairs, documented plans to flee the country. Add to that the Mitchell Ventures intellectual property claims, which could prevent Thomas from working in his field entirely, and we have extraordinary leverage." Walter outlined the financial recovery strategy. The court orders had successfully frozen domestic accounts, and international banking treaties were being invoked to secure the offshore funds Thomas had hidden. "We've identified approximately $1.8 million in recoverable assets," Walter explained. "That includes the Costa Rica property, which was purchased with traceable marital funds. The remaining amount may be more challenging to recover, but we're pursuing every avenue." Melissa from Brunswick added their perspective. "The firm is conducting a comprehensive audit of all accounts Thomas managed. Preliminary findings suggest he may have been skimming from client funds as well, which would elevate this to significant criminal fraud. Brunswick is prepared to pursue criminal charges independently of your civil case." By noon, the coordinated strategy was in place. Grace would communicate our settlement terms to Thomas's attorney, terms that would grant me full ownership of our remaining marital assets, recovery of all diverted funds to the extent possible, and complete control of Mitchell Ventures and its intellectual property. In exchange, we would not actively push for criminal prosecution, though we couldn't prevent it if authorities decided to proceed independently. As Grace prepared to leave, my phone rang with a call from Emily. "Mom, have you heard from Dad? He's been calling us nonstop since last night, saying there's been a huge mistake and he needs our help." I sighed, hating that the children were being dragged into Thomas's desperate attempts to salvage his situation. "Emily, everything I told you and Jason is true. Your father is facing legal consequences for his actions, and he's trying to find allies. The best thing you can do is refer him to his attorney. He sounds different. Scary, almost. He told Jason that you're trying to destroy him and that we need to choose sides." Her voice trembled slightly. "You don't need to choose sides," I assured her. "Just distance yourselves until the legal matters are resolved. Your father's not thinking clearly right now." After comforting Emily as best I could, I relayed the conversation to Grace, who immediately contacted Thomas's attorney to demand he cease attempting to involve our children. The day progressed with a series of updates and developments. Brunswick announced Thomas's suspension to staff, citing compliance violations under investigation. Detective Warwick confirmed that formal criminal charges were being prepared. Paul reported that Thomas had checked into another hotel and appeared to be drinking heavily, according to staff observations. By evening, the pressure was building on all fronts. At 7 p.m., Grace called with unexpected news. Thomas's attorney has reached out requesting an urgent settlement conference. It seems Brunswick shared details of their internal audit findings with him this afternoon, and the prospect of criminal fraud charges has created substantial motivation to resolve the civil matters quickly. "What are they offering?" I asked, surprised by the rapid development. "Nothing specific yet, but they're signaling willingness to meet most of our demands." I suspect Thomas has realized the extent of his legal exposure and is trying to mitigate the worst consequences. The settlement conference was scheduled for the following morning at Grace's office. I spent the evening reviewing our position with Walter, ensuring I understood the financial implications of various settlement scenarios. Around 10 p.m., as I was preparing for bed, the security system chimed with an alert. "Motion detected at the front gate." Diane immediately checked the cameras while I watched on the indoor monitor. The image showed Thomas, disheveled and obviously intoxicated, attempting to enter the gate code. "I'll handle this," Diane said calmly, activating her radio to alert the patrol car stationed nearby. "Please stay inside and away from windows." I watched on the security feed as Diane approached Thomas, maintaining a safe distance. Though I couldn't hear their exchange, Thomas's increasingly agitated gestures made it clear he was demanding entry. When Diane firmly refused, pointing to what appeared to be a copy of the restraining order, Thomas's posture changed abruptly, from pleading to threatening. He jabbed a finger in her direction, then kicked the gate in frustration. The patrol car arrived within minutes, 2 officers approaching Thomas with cautious professionalism. After a brief, tense exchange, they escorted him to their vehicle, not in handcuffs, but clearly not giving him a choice in the matter. Diane returned to confirm that Thomas had been removed from the property and was being taken back to his hotel, with a stern warning that any further violations would result in arrest. "He won't be back tonight," she assured me, "but we'll maintain elevated surveillance just in case." I thanked her, then retreated to my bedroom, shaken by Thomas's appearance at the gate. The man I glimpsed on the security monitor bore little resemblance to the controlled, polished husband I had known for decades. This Thomas, desperate, disheveled, raging at the consequences of his own actions, was a stranger. The next morning brought a surprising development. Thomas's attorney contacted Grace before the scheduled settlement conference. "My client has instructed me to accept all terms as outlined. He's prepared to sign immediately, with the understanding that you will not actively pursue criminal charges." Grace called me immediately. "This is unusual. Complete capitulation before negotiation even begins suggests Thomas has other concerns we may not be aware of." "Like what?" I asked, puzzled by this sudden surrender. "Possibly additional criminal exposure we haven't yet uncovered. Or perhaps Brunswick has privately indicated that prosecution is inevitable regardless of our position, and he's trying to resolve at least one front of his legal battle." Whatever the reason, Thomas's unconditional acceptance of our terms represented a complete victory. By midday, the settlement documents were signed. I received full ownership of the marital home, all remaining domestic accounts, control of Mitchell Ventures and its intellectual property, and legal claims to recover the diverted offshore funds. Thomas relinquished all marital claims in exchange for a single payment of $50,000, enough to support him temporarily, but a fraction of what he had stolen. As I signed the final documents in Grace's office, a strange mix of emotions washed over me. Relief that the legal battle had ended so decisively. Vindication that Thomas had been held accountable for his betrayal. But also a profound sadness for what had been lost, not just financially, but the shared history and trust that could never be recovered. "What happens now?" I asked Grace as she gathered the signed papers. "The civil matter is essentially resolved, pending recovery of offshore assets." The criminal investigation will proceed independently. Brunswick's audit has apparently uncovered substantial evidence of professional misconduct beyond what we initially discovered. That evening, as I sat alone in the house that was now legally mine alone, I received a text from Philip Henderson. Thomas resigned this afternoon rather than face termination. The firm will be releasing a statement tomorrow citing personal misconduct as the reason for his departure. Criminal referrals have been made. Thought you should know. Thomas's professional reputation, the thing he had valued perhaps even more than money, was now in tatters. His career in financial management was effectively over. His carefully cultivated image of success and integrity shattered beyond repair. 3. Days later, Detective Warwick called to inform me that Thomas had been arrested on multiple charges of wire fraud, misappropriation of client funds, and attempted identity theft related to the credit card incident in Miami. Released on bail, he faced years of legal proceedings and potential prison time. In the weeks that followed, I began the process of rebuilding. Walter and his team successfully recovered nearly $1.4 million of the diverted funds, not the full amount, but enough to provide financial security. The Mitchell Ventures intellectual property, which Thomas had continued using throughout his career, proved valuable when licensed properly to financial institutions, creating a steady income stream I hadn't anticipated. Emily and Jason arrived for their planned visit, the three of us navigating the awkward reality of discussing Thomas's actions and the family's future. They were angry and confused, but ultimately supportive, particularly when they understood the full extent of their father's betrayal. "He called me again yesterday," Jason admitted during dinner. "Asking for money, if you can believe it. Said he was in a temporary cash flow situation." "What did you tell him?" I asked, curious rather than concerned. Jason shrugged. "That he should contact his attorney. Then I blocked his number. 6 months later, as autumn painted Charlotte in brilliant colors, I sat on the patio overlooking the garden I had cultivated for decades. Laura visited regularly, and my consulting business had expanded to include financial recovery services for women in situations similar to mine, a niche I unfortunately understood all too well. Thomas had accepted a plea deal on the criminal charges, receiving a 5-year sentence with possibility of parole after 3 years. Rachel Porter had relocated to Atlanta as planned, occasionally providing additional information to investigators as they continued unraveling Thomas's financial schemes. The divorce was final, the legal battles resolved, the immediate crisis overcame. Yet occasionally, I still found myself staring at old photographs, wondering how the young man I had married, ambitious but seemingly principled, had transformed into someone capable of such calculated betrayal. The answer, I realized, didn't really matter. What mattered was that when faced with the discovery of his deception, I had found strength I didn't know I possessed. Thomas had spent our retirement fund on his mistress, not knowing that I owned his entire future. But more importantly, I now owned my own future, stronger, wiser, and free from the shadow of a man who had underestimated me for the last time. As twilight settled over the garden, I closed the photo album and turned toward the house, not the raw shrine to a failed marriage it had once been, but a home renewed by truth and resilience. The path forward wasn't what I had planned for 30 years, but it was mine to shape, one day at a time. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.